So again, Joe Schrader here with you. This is our third meeting already now of the Facility Advisory Committee, FAC. Feel free to grab some dinner if you haven't yet. That's all good right now, but just want to get us underway. Again, since we have people maybe tracking off the video or just joining us or what have you, just a reminder, 8-month commitment to address some significant challenges in facilities for the community and district and try to make some advisory recommendations to the board by November, certainly by the end of the calendar year. That's our goal. So again, here is June already. Happy summer. Hope you're having a good start to it. Here's our agenda for tonight. So this is, again, I've done this enough over the years where about meeting 3, like what's happened by now is where we are. You've had a big information dump. There's a lot of information to try to catch you up to speed, and like some people have more information than others, so you're trying to really equate that across the group as best you can. So when we had our planning meeting, I just shared, I think we just need to take a little bit of time at the start of this meeting to get what are the most key points of the first 2 meetings? It's just kind of like, okay, so that's kind of where we are, so make sure we understand that, hopefully. So, because then that sets us up for, there's been a survey effort, and Bill Foster's here today to talk about, okay, here's what the results of the community shared with you about that. You can fold that into your recommendations. We looked at the various consolidation options last time. We asked you, if you remember, like after you jigsawed it and did some ideas on each one, we asked you to give us some feedback about where we'd start in the evaluation of that. So we'll get into that. In fact, item number 4 is by far our biggest topic today, and that's probably where you want to spend the time anyway. That's so we're going to spend a good amount of time today. Also, like today, a meeting like 3 in a series like this is also the time where it seems like the natural design starts to go from less speaking to you, less. Certainly there's table conversations and table processing of information, but we start moving now into like table trends to like full group discussion. And that's kind of how it goes. It's just a natural development, and that's why we need more time for something like number 4. We're also going to, if you looked at the 8-step process, we have all those meetings. Remember, one of our tasks is also to take a look at right now some different experiences at the secondary level for students, and we're trying to look at that as well. So we're just going to take a quick little dip into here's the current situation at secondary. Pretty much, it's Central versus Logan. And in terms of programming or facilities, so you know that. Give you enough information where you can actually give us some input, because we actually have to come back by August with some, like maybe Bray Architects, give you some ideas. So again, we want to get a sense of, make sure you understand what we see as the challenges or what the district does. And before we leave today, give us a little input on that too, which will give a little prep time for us to go deeper in like August, September, around that area. So again, elementary is primary, but you see why we're going to get to the secondary today, just to give us a little input from you, to get us deeper later in the summer, and have enough prep time to do that right. Then we're going to definitely have table team discussion a couple times, especially at the end here, just a quick process. What do we need to be thinking about in that August preparation for secondary? But again, item 4 will be the biggest part today. And then we'll get you on your way by 8:30 as promised, or sooner, okay? That's our agenda. It should make sense how you see it rolling out of the 8-meeting sequence. Again, the key parts are in that agenda. Rolling forward is, we would try to have it to use your time well. Any questions on the agenda before we go on to the rest of the night? Again, food's available. If you need something, drinks too, or water, what have you, so grab some. Again, I'm Joe Schrader. Joe's fine. Again, thank you. In case you're wondering about who are the people I'm sitting by, again, intentionally having you continue to meet people. Make sure you get to know each other. This is part of the effort. Again, but a big thanks for making the commitment. So let's just take a little bit on that regrounding. So I feel like part of my role is, like I said, I said this the first night, I'm kind of like from Switzerland. Like I'm the neutral guy. I'm not from here. I care about La Crosse a lot. I've told you that at the outset. La Crosse has a big impact on my family. Wonderful, but I don't live here. So what I try to do is I knew when I was hired to help with this, like you had challenges. Quite honestly, your challenges aren't that unique, I'm sorry to say. They're fairly common right now in Wisconsin. You have your own data, your own situation, but that's part I want to share with you too. And then, across the state now, systems are having to do, and communities have to sort this sort of thing out for the reasons you'll see. But what I thought I could be helpful with here, and I know if you missed a meeting or we're trying to get, it's been a month almost, like what would be like, in my mind, like almost like curated, like of all the slides we've seen, there've been dozens, like what are the most important salient ones that I would like, can we come back to this if we need to, like let's remind ourselves of why we're here and what the task is before us. So remember, what we're trying to do throughout this is explore, ultimately make recommendations and refine it. We're moving from explore to evaluate elementary tonight, so a good time to actually take a look at this. So of my short, maybe 12 slides, this would be one of them that I've, like as I look at the first 2 nights. Like you have in the Crosse, again, an enrollment history that's continuing to decline significantly over the decades, and in fact, the projections are even haven't been as stark as the actual reality has been. So there's definitely a clear trend of declining enrollment here, and of course that matters. The number of students impacts the amount of funding that continues programming and services that people value. A second big piece is the state finance issues that have, it goes back many years. Again, you see from the header here from Patty from the first meeting, we came together. Again, so the gap, again, I don't want to read all this stuff again, you've seen this, but again, besides the key enrollment decline, another thing that's been going on over similar years is this growing gap between where revenue caps were and then the underfunding of that, and then what's resulted. So at this point now, back when it shifted significantly back at the start of the chart, $3,200 less per pupil. That's a 19 million plus difference from what it otherwise would have been if that hadn't shifted so dramatically some years ago. So that's a key trend. This is, again, why you see this again and again in many communities. Every district I've ever worked in or in Wisconsin or served in like this kind of capacity has always had some sort of maintenance expectations. Most of the systems have, facilities have been around a while, some very old. And whenever you have that, you have maintenance projects, and like you see here, you add these all up over time, you can see there's a big gap between the maintenance that ideally should be done and then the district's ability with the caps, et cetera, to actually be able to fund that. And of course, the more facilities you have, typically the bigger that gap is between maintenance needs and those needs not being met. So that's part of the issue too. A fourth slide, again, of all the dozens you've seen, I would look at, equalization aid. So again, one thing that's happening is your property value collectively across the community, the district community, is increasing. And as property value increases and enrollment declines, it means you get less state aid. And so that's another one of the key fiscal issues that's tied to enrollment and also property values, interestingly, but that's how the formula works. So another thing that's happened, and you've been doing this, I think it's a matter of success here, I would say, that you've worked within this system of the structural gaps here with funding and the shortfalls that we just talked about, but you've been every 5 years for some time going to an operational referendum. And so that's allowed you to close those gaps a bit, and that's how you try to work through, again, the earlier slides we saw. In fact, and I bring this up because one of the questions, again, as I was trying to plow through this, I remember one of you saying the first night, like, why don't we just ask for more operational money if that's what we want to do? And as I looked at this, I'm reminded that the board actually did, 3 times more than the last, and then one of the decisions I have to assume they made was that, okay, we can, there's a bigger need than ever. We're going to ask 3 times as much we have. At the same time, we can't ask for all that. We also have to balance that with, quite frankly, something I think this task force to do. Like, how do we deal with the challenges and also find some efficiencies or some other ways to reduce costs? So again, just that point made, again, that stands out to me because this is not something I offer. This is one that does not look like a lot of other districts. Like to have it consistently being supported, and then the most recent one 3 times as much as your trend, and yet here's the situation. Now, this is the one new slide, because the one thing I asked at our last planning meeting, I said, okay, I see all this. Can you show me what the projection would be now that you got that money? So this is the one new slide of the ones I'm showing you today. And I think it's important enough. There's a couple here. I want us just to have them around because I think it's important, like how to track that a little bit. So I'm going to leave it here too. You have it in your slide packet for later, but maybe I want to refer to this. But basically, even with this successful referenda to close some of those gaps with, decreasing enrollment, shortfalls in funding, property wealth rising with enrollment going down. So we have, all those issues. We have less aid coming in. So you do this, and after a couple of years, you're back in this spot here. And if you look at the projection right now from Patty's office is 3 years out, you got a deficit of 2.2. The next year, 3.1, et cetera. Because again, you start seeing those same powers. These are this is money for a bit of time, and then again, you keep on seeing those divides happen. So again, those are important numbers to have because, again, we're really trying to, the board is trying to, and administration is trying to have a proactive effort to deal with this. That's part of the task force, to take the time to think about this, understand the realities, and then make some proactive recommendations. So otherwise, if you don't make some, now you're trying to solve $3 million on programming or something, or services or staffing if you can't find other ways of doing it. That's just how districts get to a spot where you have to find some way of doing it. This is also a reminder, because of decreasing enrollment and because you have the same number of buildings you've had for quite a while, what's happening is you're having some excess space. And again, so you have all that going on. So those are that would be about, if I had 12 slides, I was thinking like, okay, I'm not from town, I'm trying to get the uniqueness of this context in place. Those are some of the ones that kind of made most sense to me. I hope those are helpful for you. Again, to have them in one spot so you can, you get the slides, you can come back to these if you want. Then if you remember last meeting, we also had our education leaders talk about, so Troy and Shelley talked to us about what was going on, particularly at the elementary level, and they made some recommendations at the outside of it for the number of classroom sections they think ideally would make sense and be an educational benefit for all kids here, overall anyway, and then the overall school enrollment, which would be different than currently. So because currently, again, if you're tracking the dots, right, because there's this much excess space, that means there's more buildings than right now you have students to fill that. So what happens is you have a lot of schools that have 1 to 2 section grades. And when 1 to 2 section grades or schools that are smaller happen, you have these sorts of issues pop up that would be, for most people, when I look at that, I go like, those would not be optimal things I would want as a former superintendent or director of instruction or principal. I would be saying, like, in those roles I've had in my past, those are all hamper our ability to get at a better education for all kids, especially across the system. So that's the current reality based on the things we saw. That we're all, think about everything else we saw before this. My 8 slides were fiscal, enrollment, budgetary, political maybe. These are about educational. So just reality, space, and educational. And so they were saying particularly those are challenges for, they call MAPLE, right? The music, art, physical education, library, English language learners. Because there's a lot of wasted time on windshields. I have to bounce between 3 schools, that sort of thing. If I'm with a teacher, maybe I'm the only teacher that teaches a grade, or there's only one other teammate, not like 3 or 4, where I can have more collaboration. So then they were referring to the research that came, and a whole bunch of research has been out there over the recent years about this sort of thing. So like an optimal size, probably somewhere that you see here, 350 to 400, optimal number of sections. And the biggest reason is because if you have 3 to 4 sections, it allows you to address a lot of those previous issues. So again, that's why they're making a recommendation. So while you have to make these hard choices, there's also some benefit that could come out of this that would be better than the current situation. We actually could maybe raise the profile. In fact, I would take away the maybe. You definitely would create a design that would have opportunity for a number of good things to happen. So this was the other slide, and again, I thought this was important. We had so many things, it gets almost lost in this. But I want to put this up too, but as I do, you can look at it up on the screen. It's easier to see there anyway. But this one is really showing, so what would mean if we to consolidate? Consolidate means you come together with 1 or more sites, or you reduce a site or so. So again, if we close a site, there's 9 sites right now. If we closed one, this is an estimate. Again, as we get further into this, we can get more specific as well, but the estimate would be about 1.4 million savings. What would be the benefits educationally? You would have more balanced classrooms, more collaboration, fewer split classrooms, fewer traveling teachers. If you close 2, by the districts figuring out of how that would start playing out in the puzzle, it would be likely no split classrooms, likely no traveling costs. You see the differences. And again, for me, that's why I wanted this, because I saw this, but I didn't know this. Do you see what I'm saying? That's why I asked. So again, everything you've seen so far, you saw all the rest of this. The only thing that's new tonight is this, but I'm trying to make the connection, because quite honestly, as facilitator, again, I'm from Switzerland. All I want is a good process. You guys got to own your own situation. I'm trying to help you deal with that in a really productive, positive way that serves all your kids and your community well. But ultimately, like, one of the simple, really direct questions is, so Would you recommend ultimately that the district would, the board would close a school, would close 2 schools? I'm not sure what you'd recommend, but that's one of the questions. I'm not asking it tonight, but that's one of the things that this group should be considering and giving some thought about. And then if so, then which schools would it be? And I know these are hard, but that would be the situation we see it. Yeah, question here? I'll just give you this one, Anna.
Can we just review quick closing 1 versus 3? Is that a potential typo? Because it says fewer traveling teachers if we close 3, but on 2 it says likely no traveling teachers. So I'd think 3 we would also not have traveling teachers.
I didn't do that. Do you know, Aaron?
Some of the elementary schools start to get bigger than that kind of ideal size. And so then you start having a need for more teachers to show up for those sections at that new larger school. So, yep, there's like an optimal point where you don't have traveling teachers, and then there's like a too small and a too big, so there's kind of this like zone of optimal size. And then as you get too big, you do get traveling teachers again, and that creates the same issues that you had with too few.
Good catch. So thanks for the answer. I mean, so it's kind of silly, that Goldilocks principle. I mean, you learn it as a little kid. Oftentimes it's like that sweet spot, right? Not too much, not too little. But again, that's just one of those things. I saw that slide. It really made me think as I'm driving home last time. And again, that's why I asked for this, if that helps you think through that as well, because that would be a piece, like how does this all work with the puzzle of all the things we're trying to do? So anyway, in summary, this is, at least for me, how do I make some sense of this? So this is, again, my effort. I hope it's helpful. I hope you can kind of connect the dots from all the stuff you heard to the 12 slides I just kind of highlighted to this. So as I see it, this is the summary where we are today, starting meeting 3. Like, there's some, the task of this group, one of the tasks is to make a consolidation recommendation, and so financially, there's some reasons for it, because there's ongoing declining enrollment, because there's significant financial challenges, even with successful referenda, and that there's excess space in district buildings. I hope you can go back and point that out to some of the information, the data, the slides we already shared. And then there's also some instructional reasons, which are actually positives, from my view again. I mean, you might see them differently, but again, they're clearly positives to me, that you could actually get some benefits around balanced classrooms, fewer splits, collaboration for staff, less travel time, so better use of your HR funding, and then better support of your staff to do good work for the kids and have student access to teachers, particularly the MAPLE teachers we said earlier. Okay, so those are some of the things. So again, I hope that's helpful. It's one space. Part of my job is to help get it clear and more coherent as we go through a process. I hope that's helpful. I did my best, so I'll move on, okay? But that's part of like the background before we get into the agenda tonight. Thanks again for the exit slips. We're going to do this every time. It's how we try to keep a finger on the pulse of what you're thinking. So again, what went well? Good discussion time, good information presented. Like we knew the first time was a lot of sit and get. We told you the second time would be less of it. We'd have more table time, so that just was a natural product. So glad you recognized that. That was definitely what we thought would happen, and you appreciated it. You like more information? We have more tonight. We're trying to give you as much information that would be helpful. We have more that we could give you, so just know we'll kind of play that out as we go, because again, part of the challenge is just kind of what Anna was just asking, like how do we give you too much or too little or just right? Because we don't have to make decisions tonight. We just got to keep on making the process, and it is that kind of continuing narrowing as we're trying to do here. So but again, we'll talk about it as we go. And then what do you want to learn more about? Class size information. You'll see that as it plays out in some of the elementary consolidation options tonight. And then what other options available besides consolidation? We heard that at least one of the exit slips. Certainly heard from at least one more person while I was walking around. So let's just get to that, because again, what we'll try to do always is, we have the exit slips, but we also have the QR forms here, right? The QR forms are if we run out of time for questions, because at some point, we just want to make sure we use this time well for the activities we're going to try to do. Like tonight, there might be 3 questions. We got time for 2. If we have to keep moving, I'll just say, can you just put on a QR form? And again, so we can still, I hope you see by now, we're going to answer your question. and we'll get it to you by the next meeting for sure, and you usually get it in advance of the meeting, right? That's what's been happening. And then it'll also just allow us to do the processing piece. So, but here are 3 of them, because I just thought I'm just going to pull these out too. We actually have, if you looked at it, Aaron, I think you sent it over the weekend, I think it's 6 pages now, because they're going to continue to add in as you go through the process. We're in meeting 3. So this is one of them. So it was really coming right out of this question here. What other options besides consolidation, or why are we looking at this? And again, the reason for considering consolidation, I mean, the answer is pretty much, I wrote this slide, I think on Saturday, and I saw Aaron's answer on Sunday, and I thought, like, that sounds, I mean, that's how I'm seeing it too. There's definitely, that's where you are. I mean, you've had a lot of feedback about secondaries. People want 2 high schools. You're going from 3 to 2 middle schools. You have, so now we're at the elementary level. There's been some really clear feedback. I mean, I haven't been here, but that's how I understand it. And so that's part of this too, is this is the level then where you have to find some resolution to this, because the boards, from my view, based on their decision, will ask for 3 times as much in the operational referendum, but if we still have issues, we're going to have to find other ways to match that with some efficiencies or dealing with the realities of things we can't control and things we can, and that's where we are. So another question that came up is, the research and the evidence for the recommendations. There are 3 to 4 sections per grade level, or the appropriate 350 to 400 kids in a school. So again, if this isn't live linked now on the slide deck, I just took a screenshot, but you got this over the weekend. Again, for people that would be watching this not in the committee, the district posts this stuff regularly after each meeting, and you can see this on the website too if you want to get into it. There's all those links. They have this, so I've seen this again and again. People have been using this as good information, research-based information, to try to make better policy decisions. And then lastly, Anna asked the question about the Hogan. Again, and so would Hogan be a consolidation option? It could be, but it's not part of the elementary school. So, you would have, and there's the costs are, the savings would be less, because a lot of the costs aren't in, again, teachers, and again, the site would have, like, the puzzle pieces of bringing kids in certain buildings. You don't have the same benefit from that. So again, and you still have to have, these people have to go somewhere and work. So again, so I don't know so you see an answer to that question. It isn't a significant, if you're going to find like a building to close, like if you thought like we could close the Hogan and then we'd solve it, I hope you can see you aren't going to solve this, or you're going to get the benefit from that, and that's part of the challenge. But again, it's a great question. That's just being good due diligence, and that's hopefully a good answer to that. Before we get into the setting up the meeting, again, I said last time, coming together is a beginning, staying together is a progress, and working together is success. We're at that second level right now. I just want to be really honest. I always think these are like meeting 3, 4, to me, having done this lots of years, this is a really important meeting today, because at this point, people start going like, this is a big challenge, and it is. I mean, so it is like, these are, the reality is, and I just want to be honestly, sensibly saying, hopefully what you see is that, this is a big challenge before this community. You have your own unique data and context, and that this is not unusual though. I work across the state. I've been in my role at OSSA for over a decade. These are just a few. Bill and I were just chatting the other day, like, who else is doing this around the state? Because I know there's a whole bunch, and we just kind of took like 2 minutes. And they're like Green Bay, Wausau, Kenosha, Racine, Oshkosh, West Dallas, West Milwaukee, West Bend, and then a whole bunch of others I could say that. Those are ones that are more your size. I could go through another whole series of names, which maybe you feel like it's less relevant. But the point is, like, every place has their own stuff, but they're dealing with the declining enrollment because of demographic shifts. They're dealing with the financing challenges they see. They're dealing with I could go on, but these are fairly, like, everyone's got their own data on the slides, but the slides are pretty similar because these are statewide, bigger issues than just the community issue. It's societal. It's all this. So, so so this is the point. Like, okay, so how do we start working through that in a real adult manner, with integrity, trying to give wise counsel to the community and board in an advisory capacity about how you would best handle this proactively, while you still have an ability to do that fairly well. And actually, in the process, again, I think what I also often don't see is an ability to actually improve instructional programming. I think you actually have that here, where sometimes it seems like it's just flat out just going to close schools, and I'm not sure there is a real benefit. So I think there's some opportunities. I'm trying to be real honest with you as I see it. Again, and as I said now, maybe it'll make a little more sense. I said at the outset, You know, I want a good process. You're going to come up with a recommendation. Your norms, we'll find from the group where the will of the group is in terms of pace and what have you. Typically, my approach, and it'll be continuing to be this way, is I want us to be expeditious without rushing. So that means we're not going to try to get stuck somewhere if we don't have to necessarily. Understand it's all kind of hard to work through, but we'll keep on trying to work through it expeditiously. You're going to give us your input tonight again to help us keep narrowing and moving forward. We'll check in on the exit slips. If you got questions, we'll try to deal them in place or with the QR response. We want to have a good process without getting stuck and making sure, and again, you've given us 8 evenings. I want to really honor 8 evenings as long as we can without it feeling rushed. I'm just trying to lay all on the table. So I hope that makes sense to you, because I mean, we don't take that lightly. Here it's June and a summer evening, beautiful, and you're here in a gym. So thank you. So with that, our norms are here. And then I want to just take 1 minute before we're done with this. The norms help us be our best selves. Every time I look at them, any group, everyone has one that's a stretch for them. So for example, we're going to have an opportunity to talk as a full group tonight for the first time probably, and a little bit of that anyway. So when it says share the air, that might be your nudge to say something if you feel like you usually don't. Or it might be something, okay, I want to share it, but I can't take 5 minutes because that takes like 300 people's opportunity away. So again, think about which one, before we go on, which one of those is your stretch. And I'd like you to pick the one that's your biggest challenge. And I'd like to encourage you to set that as an intention so you can be your best self, because norms should help us be our best selves so we have a really great process. So which one is your stretch? Just take 20 seconds, find it. If you want to write it down or just put it in your head. But again, setting an intention matters. It'll help you be your best self. What is that? I'll be quiet for 20 seconds to allow you to do that. All right, thank you. Thanks for that little time of background. I hope that's helpful for you. It's just an honor to be here with you. I really mean that. So with that, reviewing the survey results. So again, that just completed. Bill Foster here, the owner and founder of School Perceptions, the district's partner in this, is here. So how about a hand for Bill Foster, please?
Well, thanks for having me tonight. My job is to take you through the results of the community survey. I'll stand here. All right, again, School Perceptions, we've been around for over 20 years now. I've actually worked with the district for almost 20 years now. So I've been here several times. Good to be back. The report's organized kind of around the background information that was in the survey. We're going to look at some demographics, slice and dice the data to try to make sense of it. And then we'll have questions at the end. Or if you have a question, raise your hand, we'll answer it anytime you want. So the survey went out. It was actually in the form of both a staff survey and a parent community. The parent community went out in a postcard as well as emails. We had 1,511 parent community responses and 541 staff. And the background information, or really the setup question for the section that you're all concerned with, is this idea of exactly what Joe just got done talking about, the fact that we were dealing with declining enrollment. We've got extra schools that are not at capacity. They cost more money to heat, clean, and operate, and that's part of our challenge. So the charge of the group is to study the options and how to adjust our elementary school configurations, which could include consolidation. So I put this slide together and I tried to think of a way to make it easier to see it all, and I couldn't come up with a better way. So it's busy, but there are some breakout slides behind this one. But in a nutshell, what we did was we broke it into 3 separate groups. We broke it into staff is gray. The community, and by definition, community is neither a staff or a parent. So I don't have a kid in school, I don't work at the school, I'm a community member. The reason that group's important is they represent the majority of your taxpayers. And then parents are in blue. So, and then I sorted based on parents. I don't know why I did that, but I had to sort on someone, so it's sorted on blue. And the interesting thing is all 3 groups, at least for the first 4, completely agree. So number 1 is appropriately sized classrooms. Number 2 is safe and secure schools. Everybody wants that. Comparable opportunities for students at each school, and neighborhood accessible schools. So everybody agreed those are your top criteria. So as you think about if we do in fact want to, you know, and I'm an engineer by training, so when I look at this, I see 2.2 million, and if we close one school, we get 1.4 million, right? So we should have little bars on that to show. So right away, closing one wouldn't be enough, at least if that's how we're going to try to address the projected budget deficit. So as you think about that, really our goal here was to create criteria in which you could decide which schools would be good to recommend if we want to do that. So all top 4, or all the top 4 priorities are the same for all 3 groups. Then we went to the next 4, which are safe vehicle traffic flow for student pickup and drop-off, dedicated art and music classrooms, social economic diversity in our schools, an important part of our community, or sense of place. I think that was a criteria that this group came up with that was added to our survey. And 3 of the 4 are the same. So it's not perfectly aligned, but pretty darn close. And then the last thing I wanted to point out for you is, if I'm not a staff, I'm not a parent, what's important to that group, the taxpayers that aren't involved by having kids or working here, everything that had a cost on it. So building maintenance costs of building renovation, adaptation and replacement, and lower school operating costs, which makes sense, I guess. So that's kind of the anomaly. But as far as what's most important, 7 of the 8 for even our community were the same. It's always nice when the data turns out like that. Sometimes it doesn't, but in this case it did. So what did we learn by doing this survey? The top 4 priorities were the same. There they are. 3 of the next 4 were the same. Safe vehicle traffic flow, the social economic diversity in our schools, an important part of community. So those are really your top 7 that everybody agrees with. And the community placed a high priority on cost, then a higher priority on cost than staff and parents. So the rest of the slides here, I didn't want to put these in. This breaks it out. It's a little bit cleaner. This is strictly the community on one slide. Sometimes when you make a list, there's always a top and a bottom. What's not as important is aesthetically appealing or attractive schools and meeting spaces for staff, parents, and community. This is the parent list. They have aesthetically pleasing schools, 3rd from the bottom. And for our staff, interesting, staff is less concerned about parking because they get to school first, I guess, so it's not as big of a problem. So that's the breakout for each 3 groups. And then I did put this in, and we could slice and dice the data, but I wanted to also provide this. This is the demographic information that was gathered from the parents. You can see, and this kind of corresponds to how big the school is. The more kids, the more parents they have. So, and you could also have a child at more than one of these schools. So that's why this doesn't add up to 100%. Same thing with grade level. We had representation across all the way from pre-kindergarten through 12th grade. We could look at the data based on special services that students receive, ethnicity, and then staff information, again, representation from all the schools. We could look at by position. So we got our classroom teachers, our ed specialists, our paras, and support staff. That slide didn't turn out quite as well on the conversion. So let me stop there. Questions on the data or how to use the data?
Just have on the mic, please. Thank you.
Sorry. Sorry for coming in late, but I'm glad I got to jump onto this
Yeah.
part. Just one comment I had was when looking at which schools do the children attend, I know you mentioned like size of building, but I think I just wanted to express that I think it's also looking at who's responding. You know, when I look at Northside at 2%, that doesn't correlate to the community or to the school size. So I just wanted to point that out just when we're thinking of like the equity of the responses and how we're applying that.
So what if the group wanted to, I could cross-tab the data based on school. It'd be, if you can envision, so each school would have their priorities. We could see if there's any difference, or maybe they're exactly the same. So I can put that together for you. Great point.
And again, we have some time for some questions. If anybody has one, just raise your hand. I'll get a mic by you so we cover it on the camera too. Bill, I have one. How often do you do this so much? How often the time do you see such symmetry across groups like that? Is that unicorn or not? I mean, where is that?
It actually happens
I'm sorry.
a lot more than you would expect. One of the interesting questions we probably asked in La Crosse even 10, 15 years ago was how should we measure the success of our schools? I think we have like 18 criteria. And what's interesting, this was interesting to me, was state and national test scores. So here's your test. Do you think that the state and national test scores would be in the top third, middle third, or bottom third in terms of a good measure of how we should measure the success of our schools? So raise your hand if you want to go top third, middle third, bottom. For all three groups, it's in the bottom third with every community we worked with. So you would think that would be really high because we do a lot of measuring there. But so as an example, groups generally agree. Staff, at the end of the day, there's a lot of different discussion. Now, it might be to differing degrees, but they really agree. And we had that turnout. So it's not a unicorn. It's pretty consistent. Yes,
I'm
ma'am?
coming, Kathy. Thank you.
So with these numbers that you got for the responses, is there a way to cross-reference that due to like financial demographics of the families or the household demographics, like single parent or multi-generational parents?
Great question. We did not ask a annual revenue or how much money does your family receive, or what's your income? We didn't ask that. It might correlate to school, so that we know Northside parents probably are a little less affluent than maybe other parents. One of the reasons we don't ask that is a long time ago we used to ask that on our surveys, and I got a call one day from a parent and said, just because I don't make a lot of money, does that mean you're not going to listen to my data? It broke my heart, and I said, we're never going to ask that question again. So we don't have that. You could maybe tease it out by location of the parent, but you'd still have to make an assumption that was accurate, but we don't have that. We really want to include all the data we get. Yeah.
Other questions for Mr. Foster? Yes. Jed?
Yeah, thank you. I guess one of my questions relates to looking at the total respondents. I'll do fuzzy math and call it 2,000 respondents. Do you have an idea of how many surveys went out or what our possible pool looked like?
Yeah, well, actually, it's a great question. I think do we know what the mailing list was for the postcard? I'm thinking it was 10,000 or so potential where people could take it.
And then I just have a couple of pieces. Obviously, I'd like to see more than that. We always would. A couple of things that we noticed when this survey came out was, I think, in this day and age, we got to make an easy button. A QR code on that mailer would have been, I think, probably boosted some of the respondents online, and as well as our schools do a great job. When you call any school, you get the options to have multi-language assistance in the other languages rather than just English. So those were just two things that I saw on that mailer that went out that I think would be,
That could help.
possibly a way to get that.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Boosted.
And we try to accommodate. And in fact, I think there was language that if you need special accommodations, we could bring.
It's in English.
It's in English, true.
So when you call our schools,
Yep.
our district does a really good job But I know it's not in English. So.
Right. From a statistical standpoint, when you hit about 400, your margin of error is plus or minus 5%. When you get up to 2,000, it locks down. So if you were to double this, it won't change at all.
Yeah, I don't think that to your point, I don't think the data changes much. But to the point that I think is really significant for the district to hear, we know that one of our issues here is that the community, as I forget exactly the language we use in our tasks here, is to be authentic communicators. Mm-hmm. The message that I get a lot is that the community doesn't feel that they're being valued. And so even though people got a quick postcard, if they actually do the survey, which is it is better, and it gives better community input. It makes people feel heard. So the data may not change, the suggestions may not change, but I think it's still
very good point.
Very valid to put that in.
Yes, Steve.
I was just going to point out that in the rest of the slides, it's identifying that the respondents overwhelmingly are not in the free and reduced lunch, which, as we know in many of our areas, if you go further down, it's one of the blue slides. And I just found that interesting that with some of our areas, 85% of the students are free and reduced lunch. And I don't think that should surprise us that low-income families aren't watching their internet and responding to surveys, but that's real telling when that's...
Or don't have internet.
Right.
Right.
That's
Exactly.
a larger demographic of our community.
True.
So disappointing. I'm not
But
assigning
very-
blame,
yeah,
but just
that is typical. Yeah.
Anything else for Bill before we move on to our next segment tonight?
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate that. All right, sorry. So we are going to move into the topic that's the large one for tonight, kind of evaluating the elementary school options further. So again, if you recall from our activity, jigsaw and the conversation, and then your table of conversations, one of the things we asked for, the core question was, would there be any place you'd have us start as we move from exploring these options to evaluating these options? And you gave us some fairly clear themes from the table comments that came forward. And I'm going to ask Dr. Engel to come forward and talk about like where are those, and with the information you also asked for in greater detail. So I'll hand for Dr. Engel, please.
Thank you all so much for being here tonight. The weather's nice, so I know I appreciate your time. So with the consolidation assumptions, we looked at the sheets that you turned in this last time and looked at the things that arose to the top, and there were common themes across the tables. In creating some consolidation options, we had to start with some assumptions in order to get started, and these are those that we use to kind of create some parameters around it. The first, I'm trying to align with the secondary boundary at Ferry Street where possible. It creates a pathway kind of north through Logan High School and a pathway south through Central High School. It creates those common pathways. It allows for better support structures for students and families if they're kind of seeing the same groups of teachers and other staff. Becomes predictable for parents, which we know that they appreciate knowing where their child's going to go, and it limits disruptions to student friend groups. A lot of the intra-district transfer requests we get at the middle school level are when kids are split because their elementary school goes to 2 or even 3 different middle schools, depending on how that works out. And so that was a goal in creating these where possible to keep those boundaries at Ferry Street. Second, when there were when a school was kind of consolidated elsewhere, if those students intra-district transferred in, let's say that they were in the Emerson boundary and they are going to Northwoods, if Northwoods was closed, then they would return back to their Emerson home boundary. They might still want to go somewhere else, potentially through an intra-district transfer, but our assumption was they'd go back to their home boundary. A third one, keep students closer to nearby schools when possible. Makes sense, kind of limiting bus traffic and transportation challenges. Two things that kind of pair together, 4 and 5, following logical transportation pathways when possible. So kids kind of near a bridge or coming off a main artery out of the Bluffs, they would go to like a nearby school, even if it's not as close, as the crow flies. And then parameters listed on these sheets, and we can certainly generate more as needed, as this group wants. There, within those of the top 8 that are variable between our schools, we've listed those where possible. The neighborhood accessibility kind of relates to how many are eligible for busing. Socioeconomic diversity is another that we can easily track and list there as well. And then here in the packet, we started with the 4 options that this group put together initially, and we can certainly show those other options as folks desire. And so we started with those 4, and I will go on to the first one. So the first one, and they're just listed in alphabetical order, no particular preference. But in looking at kind of reassigning the students that are in the Emerson boundary, if you had to choose, this red line that's right here is Ferry Street. That kind of goes horizontal there, and so that's the secondary boundary for Logan and Central, and so that was used as a dividing line there. Some students go to Summit, to Northside, to Northwoods, to Hamilton, and to State Road, and those are just choices right now for the purpose of kind of examining what that looks like. As we dove in further, if there was a particular boundary or a closure that this group was interested in, we could examine what those boundaries look like to be more logical or sensical. And it just kind of lists the number of students that go to each, just kind of as a reference point. And then those key parameters, it indicates the average elementary enrollment. So in this case, it goes from 273 in each of our elementary schools, and the average goes up to 308. Those that are busing eligible, it goes from 14.7% to 21.6%. Most of the kids in the Emerson neighborhood can walk, and they would be going to a bunch of schools where they could no longer walk. And so they would be eligible for transportation. And so that's something to consider. And then lastly, socioeconomic balance. Tried to find a metric to compare apples to apples as best we could, and took the standard deviation, right? So it's the average difference from the average. And so lower is more similar, higher is less similar. And I've got some data sheets if you want like the specific breakdowns for schools. There's still quite a variability. It's still, maybe 76 on the high end and 32% on the low end. But the standard deviation does decrease a little bit with this particular scenario from 19% to 17%. So our schools get a little bit more similar to each other for socioeconomic balance. Any questions about that data?
These numbers represent, just clarifying, these numbers represent if Emerson were to close, this is where this number of students go one way, and then the bottom key parameters are the change in that. Okay, thank you.
Yep, that's correct. And like I said, it's just a mock-up. It's hopefully somewhat logical, but it's certainly not the final product if that was the route we went.
Let's pretend that we close Emerson and Northwoods. So that population that you have sectioned off to go to Northwoods, should we close Emerson, would continue to go to North Side, or would you look at extending your Ferry Street north for more kids to go to State Road, or where would that go?
They would in turn go to North Side in the 2-school closure option.
Which you're going to look at here shortly, right?
Yeah, I've got just the raw numbers for that, yes.
Aaron, one last thing. Can you, because the key parameters, I'm not, maybe you said it, I just missed it, but again, we had from the survey, top 4 factors, then a few other secondary factors. Can you talk about how that makes sense with the key parameters up here?
Sure. Many of our key parameters that were listed by the community are common across our schools already. So comparable programs at the elementary school, they're very, very similar. There's very few differences. The handful of things might be like a community schools coordinator at Northside and Hamilton, and those aren't on this list. But those are very unique niche things as opposed to kind of general variability. Other examples are, safe pickups and drop-offs. All of our pickups are safe right now. There are more optimal ones and less optimal ones, and there are some lines that are very long and some that are very short, depending on how much busing is there, how many kids walk. But these are the parameters that stuck out as like being significantly different between our schools and worth diving into further. But like I said, if there's other things that are listed there that you want data on, we can generate that too.
I think we saw another hand somewhere. Did I?
Carl.
Carl.
And this is just the existing locations of where students currently reside. So this fluxes over time, right?
It has been relatively stable through the years. It could change. When they built Southern Bluffs and Northwoods Elementary, they anticipated building to happen out there and for enrollments to increase. It happened to a certain extent at Southern Bluffs. It went up, and now it's coming back down. At Northwoods, it really never happened. I was reading an article from 1990s when they built that building, and they indicated there were only 52 kids that lived in that neighborhood. There are still 52 kids that live in that neighborhood. So nothing really ever changed out there in terms of development or the types of people that were living there. It's mostly second homes and middle school and high school kids.
Thanks.
Courtney, did you have something? No. All right, and then go on to option B. Similar story, with slightly different metrics. Once again, the space, the district. This one's kind of an odd-shaped one. It looks like a hockey stick or a boomerang, and it's cut up in slightly different ways to kind of move kids to areas that are close to where they live already. Average elementary enrollment increases, again, of course. The number of busing eligible increases in this option as well, largely due to students attending Southern Bluffs. And then also the students that are living on kind of this way towards the river, they have to cross a hazardous traffic area, and so they get busing as well, regardless of where they go. And then the socioeconomic balance decreases, but not as much in the other option. Option C was Northwoods. Once again, this lists where the students are headed, and then the changes in busing. And that's an error. I apologize for that asterisk there. That's not supposed to be on this slide. That's on a different one. And so busing actually goes down here from 14.7 to 11.7%. And then once again, the socioeconomic balance improves a little bit.
So Aaron, just to clarify on C, they should strike the last line?
Yes, please.
Okay,
Yep,
thank you.
that would go for Hamilton if we were considering that, but not necessary for this option. And then lastly, Spence was the fourth one that was identified by this group, given the factors we looked at this last time. And average elementary size increases, busing eligible stays the same. Pretty much every kid in Spence walks. It's not eligible for busing. The one caveat is there's a attendance zone up in the Bluffs, but it's not enough kids to change the percentage to any great degree. And then socioeconomic balance actually goes in the opposite direction. The differences get wider as opposed to smaller with the closure of that school.
Come here, Jerry. Here you go. Here. Just for the camera, thanks for getting that on the mic.
Oh, sure. Just because you brought it up with the previous slide regarding Hamilton, is there situations where there's going to be a big enough influx into these other schools that would impact these other programs, like not just SOTA, but the other ones up in Northwood or Northside and everything else?
Yeah, so new kids are attending these schools. Like, so if Northwoods were to close, 88 students would end up attending Northside Elementary that previously were not. It would not materially impact its capacity. It's a large enough school, it would be able to accommodate those students plus the existing programs. Same thing with Hamilton. So,
Michelle has one? Missed that.
Can we go back to option B? And with what would be the implication of putting those students in Hamilton versus extending State Road's boundary south and Southern Bluffs and Spence and State Road, getting those other students?
all those would be possible in kind of creating these divisions, just looking for kind of to split up the population so it's not all in one place as opposed to another if possible. And then kind of nearest elementary school when thinking about that. So, you know, there's that group towards the river that's indicated going to Hamilton. You think it could go to Spence potentially, or?
Well, or that State Road Island is
Yes.
just north of that.
Mm-hmm.
So extending that more south and like the Southern Bluffs boundary up.
That would
More.
certainly be a possibility. One of the factors that was important was neighborhood schools, right, and being able to go to your neighborhood school. Those islands are effective strategy in balancing our schools on the socioeconomic side, but it comes into conflict with that other parameter, having, you know, walkable schools that are near where you live. And so in this case, I guess I made a choice about creating walkable environments as opposed to socioeconomic balance. And
So what is the implications of the socioeconomic balance when you take all of those students and send them to Hamilton versus extending a state road boundary?
yeah. Based on kind of what I remember from the data, it would likely improve socioeconomic balance to a certain extent. Those apartments there that are near Gunderson are not low-income apartments, but they're also not single-family homes. You know, so in terms of like likely, you know, status as far as socioeconomics, probably closer to free and reduced lunch than less. But there could also be some, you know, nursing and doctors' kids in there too. I'd have to dive into that a little more closely.
So to your question, I think it's a good one. So you start playing in with these things. So the way, if you think about our tasks, top of my head here, consolidation options, the arrangements around those options, and then middle school, high school equality, you know, and programs and facilities, et cetera. So if you think about that, that's we're kind of playing between the two, like the options and then the arrangements of those. Because what you're asking is like, so ultimately you get a sense of, with the assumptions that, this is the way I understand it, Aaron, talk about these are the assumptions we made and kind of showing you the way each of these options that you said start with these, they could look with those assumptions in mind. You could make other choices. I think ultimately we do want to get direction from you about where the options that make the most sense possibly, and then talk further about the arrangements, because you're right, and that's be a natural part of maybe meeting 4 or 5, what have you, once you get more clarity about what options make the most sense for the hard decision at hand, and then how would you play around with some of the arrangements, like you just were getting at, Michelle, to figure out where you get the best movement on the parameters that people care about. Is that making sense? So again, that's just like anytime here, you want to be careful a little bit at the start, know the assumptions, see how they play out, and then if they can get a little bit, let's just get clarity around the options. That'll help us get deeper into those questions later, okay?
Yeah, and it brings up the islands question, right? Like
Yeah.
that's a question, you know, this group
you
could
asked that,
probably
so.
ask. Like, is that still working for the school district? Is there another way to approach that? Do we want to double down on islands and have islands everywhere? You know, like there's lots of ways you could approach that conversation. This is a group perfectly suited to think about that as well and provide recommendations.
And Aaron, I don't see it in here, but where do you start to evaluate the impact on the capital budget as well as the ideal size of school? This talks about where students end up going, but just looking back at some of the other data, Northwoods doesn't need a lot of capital improvement, so there's some disadvantages to closing a school that you don't have to put a lot of investment in versus others. And I'm not sophisticated enough to know which parts of that, but also then there was a discussion about putting more kids into the North Side School, which is already has a lot of capacity at 579 or whatever, but that's going to push you over that ideal. Have you started to evaluate any of that, or that would be part of our evaluation?
Part of the evaluation, as far as maintenance and capital costs, that didn't rise to the top in the parameters here, so I didn't use it as an initial, screen or present that data. We have it all available, and we can certainly pull it up again for folks with those kind of one sheets that show each building. So if that's something this group wants to consider more strongly because our community seemed to identify it as an issue, we can certainly. You all can use that as a criteria as well, and we can present that in any way you think is helpful. In terms of capacity, I've got a sheet that I can hand out here in a little bit that shows, what it does to the listed enrollment at each building, K-5, and maybe that'll be helpful too. And it shows the percent socioeconomic status as well.
I recognize that wasn't what other people talked about in the survey or anything else. But this issue is not going to go away 5 years, 10 years from now. If enrollment continues to decline, this is going to be an ongoing issue. And if you're not also looking at the capital costs as well as trying to hit that ideal sweet spot of whatever number of elementary schools, we're still going down 1% to 2% per year or more in enrollment. So how you're you're never going to solve this all in 1 year. And the community is going to need to understand this is going to have to keep being revisited as enrollment continues to go down.
Yeah, hopefully less than it has been recently, our projections show.
So I saw Nell and then Courtney, and hopefully we can continue on maybe a third. Okay, then we'll keep on moving, Hope.
Impossible question, perhaps, but I'm curious if there's any research around the degree to which the socioeconomic balance impacts like student well-being. As it relates to like the percentage differences we're looking at. So I guess what I'm asking is, moving from our current 19 to 15, do we have any sense of how important that is in the experience of students? And then how do we weigh that against, maybe this is impossible, against the impact of that walkability neighborhood school thing? Does it matter more what it feels like to be in the building when you're at school and who's around you, or the makeup of the school? Is there research around that, I guess, is what I'm looking at.
I don't know of any research. I'll add it to my list of things to be curious about and dive into. I know that from a teacher anecdotal perspective and a principal perspective, there is a difference between schools that have families that experience a lot of poverty because of the challenges that brings. And there are differences with very low poverty schools as well, and when it's between 35% and 84%, drastic difference. If it's between 45% and 60%, less difference. That said, we scale our supports to the needs of a school, and so Northside and Hamilton have higher levels of poverty. And so we have community schools coordinators that are located there to help create neighborhood resources and opportunities. Our class sizes are generally lower as poverty goes up, so that teachers have fewer students in front of them in those schools. There's title support for our schools that are above the district average for poverty, and it's scaled based on need. So while there's certainly a different environment, there's also more supports. But there's definitely a difference. If you've got 50% of your class that is really struggling versus 80% of your class because of socioeconomic needs, that's a difference. Absolutely.
To Steve's point regarding the expenses of repairing Northwoods, which it doesn't need much, I guess we would also have to evaluate the cost of busing to Northwoods. So I think it's going to be complex as we're evaluating this because we've got some competing infrastructural realities. So I just wanted to comment on that I think busing would go down, but then obviously building cost is less there. So sorry, that was not very articulate. And then I would just also echo Nell's question. I'm very curious to know how we balance that as we're making decisions too.
Yeah, I am excited to look into what's out there on socioeconomic differences and when it materially impacts instruction. So we'll find that. Katie.
Thank you. I guess I have two things now. Just again to echo Steve's, I think even though it didn't generate a high rating in the feedback, my understanding of the nature of why we're here is because of budget. And our first presentation that was so well done was about maintenance costs and how that's kind of a sinking ship. So I feel like it does feel really important as somebody who's going to be communicating about the process, that that's certainly an aspect of consideration, even if it didn't come back on the survey that way.
Absolutely. You are a representative group, right? Like your judgment and evaluation is why you were asked to be here. So you take the survey results along with everything else and evaluate it how you decide. That's why you're here.
And then the other question I have, I'm just really interested in, because with the year-round schedule at Northside, do you think as we refunnel students there, do you think that would kind of force the transition to an academic, like a traditional academic calendar? Like, is that something that's in consideration for you all as administrators? Or do you think like we would continue on with the year-round, but that may ultimately end up in people opting into other schools? Just curiosity.
Yeah, it begs the question then, so if that building is needed for a traditional calendar, for students that are opting into that, it would lead to some questions. One, do we maintain year-round? If we do maintain year-round, do we also run a parallel traditional school that's not Cooley Montessori there? And then does Cooley Montessori find a new home somewhere where there is space? Because we will still have space if just Northwoods closes. So there's lots of different ways to kind of crack that one that are important at the end of this process, but not necessarily up front. And so great consideration, but not one that has to be addressed immediately. There's some really probably simple solutions for that, I think. And then I'll just show that two-school consolidation impacts something, that is a possibility we want, to just consider. And so this shows what the resulting average K-5 enrollment is, the student economic disability, the standard deviation of economic disadvantaged, and then bus eligible for each of those. And it just takes the combinations of the four that were presented already. And there's 2 schools north of the secondary line and 2 schools south of the secondary line, and created those 4 combinations to demonstrate what it could look like with those particular schools and the resulting changes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. So again, I hope you saw that there was an opportunity here to, and I have A, B, C, D. We have more than that here. So, so you have 4 options. I'll correct that. That's an error. A, B, C, and D. And you also saw the table that we just had here, where you had maybe a 2-school combination of a north and south, and the impact of that. So really, if you think about that, you have the A, B, C, D standalone plus the 4 paired options. And then coming out of, again, where would we start with this as we go from Explore last meeting to starting to evaluate these a little bit more with the criteria in mind? So with that, again, I'll update that. But again, A, B, C, and D, or they're on the paired, do these still seem viable? That's the first thing. We want to kind of get a sense, are we on the right track with this or not, within those sets of things that you said we should start? Again, if you do think that, another question would be, do you think that any of those are more viable than the others? Now that you kind of see some of the detail around each of that, what you'd ask for. And again, you can go with the detail, again, you'll see some of around the key parameters. Does that help you at all with thinking through that? Or maybe a combination that was something that just got shared right now for the first time? And again, as you think about, again, this chart, which was reviewed from last time, and this one that was new from this time based on current information. And then the last thing, what other consolidation options, if any, should the FAC consider? I just, for help here, just put this here. These are the 9 sites again, so you'll see, these are the ones we did all in the jigsaw last time. So if you, in your slide deck, if you want to just look to the next slide, you'll see like, oh yeah, what about that? We should be looking at that. Again, you asked for information. This is one of those decisions we made. Like, there is actually, could have done this for each of the 9 sites and more combinations, there's more detail. But again, how much gets to be too much? So we thought we'd start with this tonight. And if it's helpful just to keep narrowing, again, those are the questions with D on there or the paired options for A, D, B, and C. We're going to give you 25 minutes to have a conversation at your table. And then what we'd like to do is at 25 minutes, ask the reporter to just give us a quick synopsis of that. I mean, by, again, if everyone takes 5 minutes to describe it, we won't get a chance to talk about what comes forward. So we're hoping you can get from your reporter, like give it to us in a minute so we can see within about 5 minutes where people are, and then we can have a conversation on top of that. So here's the timeline, friends. 25 minutes for this. So again, we're going to have a timekeeper. So take a moment. Who's timekeeper at your table? Take a moment. Who's going to be a reporter? And who's going to be your scribe? Take 1 minute, please, and just figure that out. I'll come back. All right, let's come on back, please. We're going to transition back then from small group, tabletop, to full group now. And who's reporter here? All right. So please give your attention now. We're going to get the report out from each of the questions from each group. Again, reporters, please, for like a minute or two to get this in. That's what we're looking for, okay? So Katie?
All right. So for the first question, we feel like, yes, these are still viable. However, we feel a little premature on making a decision.
Yep.
We feel like we need more information.
But they're all 4 more viable?
Viable,
Okay.
yes. Some more than others.
Okay, well then we get to B.
So that brings us to B. The one that we agreed on and felt comfortable sharing at this point would be Northwoods, especially given the actual population within that neighborhood and how many students would be displaced geographically versus just reassigned.
So Northwoods particularly stands out. C?
We feel like there are other consolidation options, but at this point we don't feel comfortable with the information yet to share those.
Yep.
And then we did want to add one more, maybe you could put asterisks under C for D, which we said is which of these options would help teachers and staff the most and promote teacher satisfaction?
Can you add that to a QR form? Could you do that? Because I want to.
Wait, for real?
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
Yeah, because again, I mean that's a question. That's a general question rather
Yeah.
than these 3.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, I want to keep it to these 3 for now. But yeah, we'll definitely get it answered.
We'll make a note of that.
Yeah.
We felt like that was just a factor as well when looking at the
Yeah.
structure. And that's
Appreciate it. Thank you, Katie, very much. All right. Power clap for Katie on 3. 1, 2, 3. All right. That was a little not crisp. 1, 2, 3. There we go. That's perfect. Who's reporting for the next table?
Skip me real quick.
Oh, it was like Kathy was looking at me. I thought it was you, Kathy.
They just need a
No?
polite
Okay,
pass
was it?
first.
Oh, a soft. Okay, so we'll come back. All right. So next table, Steve. They're pointing at you. Okay. Thanks, Steve.
Okay, we'll give this a try. Actually, Matt was going to be our reporter, but he's not here, so I'm stuck with it.
Yeah, you're standing though. That's great. Way to take charge.
I think just in general, we're also not ready to commit, but that it seemed that of the options that are here, there are a couple that are a little bit more obvious and less disruption by moving students around. So if you did pick 2 at a time rather than just one of them, it seemed like Hinchin and closing Northwoods had less disruption, and that Northwoods and Spence. So trying to use that as a variable to evaluate what is the least disruption on students, busing, schools. Second thing was...
Excuse me just one second. I want to make sure I get it right. So, again, Hinchin and Northwoods and Spence, right?
Right, partially because the busing eligibility
Okay.
is a smaller number.
Just so I'm getting it right. Thank you. Yep.
So again, that's part of the evaluation. We also really want to add to the discussion the reuse of facilities that you vacate should be a variable. Again, that's not in the survey, but it allows the school district for better planning. So for example, as controversial as it is, closing Emerson, there's a logical place that wants that building, which is UWL. Is that a variable that the school district needs to, or the board needs to think about? Or redevelopment of Hinchin or Spence for single-family development. So what are the redevelopment options of the vacant spaces? The other one that we didn't put in here, but it caused a lot of discussion. Northwoods is such a new facility, needs such little capital. Is that something that you would vacate this space for redevelopment and have the admins move to there? So trying to think about redevelopment, not just all the other variables about education, but what are the financial variables that the school district is going to have to deal with? Obviously, the options that seem most viable are one elementary school closure on the north side, one on the south side for the initial step, but then where's the next step? 5 years, 10 years from now, if enrollment keeps going down, what is the roadmap that this group can say, okay, the next place you need to deal with if enrollment continues to decline at this rate? So that the community knows it's not just one this year and one next year. If you make the decision as a school board, this isn't going to happen overnight. It's going to be controversial, it'll be discussed, it'll be debated. It's probably 4 or 5 years away before you're actually able to implement that change. So what happens 7 years from now? And finally, what am I missing? Table mates. Other consolidation options were Emerson and Northwoods closure seems to be real logical, but they're both on the north side. Again, controversial, but there are other uses for that. What's the last comment?
You already addressed it.
Did I? Okay. That's enough.
Thank you very much. Power clap for Steve on 3. 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much. Next table.
All right, we can get through pretty quick, hopefully, because we agree with everyone else on A, that they are all feasible.
I'm just going to put checks so far. So
Yep.
we had one say and then 2 others agree.
And we agreed that Northwoods seemed like a logical school to at least no longer be a school. Steve's tables group is a good point about the facility there. And then as we looked at C, we didn't talk a lot about other specific school closing options, but we did talk about the additional considerations on how we look at this. So again, similar to this group, we looked at how that affects our community in a certain sequence, especially if we're closing schools that are centrally located within the community and losing that space then forever, or at least several generations, to keep schools where populations are. Is there an opportunity to look a little further down the line and look at rebuilding, closing a few schools in an order and rebuilding potentially on specific properties? And then one of the pieces here that we noticed, because we have a choice team member who just noticed a difference in the data, some of the data that we have has enrollment for grades K-5, and some of the data is pre-K through 5. And so when we're looking at the capacity and current enrollments, some of the numbers that we're looking at are different. It's a different metric from some of the pages.
Thank you, Jed. Anything else?
The last one, again, similar to this, was, is there profit or some other benefit to certain sites when we close them? And as well as thinking about choice and charter options. That's one that exists in a couple of our programs that we really haven't done much evaluation on changing, reducing, or growing those programs to affect our bottom line.
Thank you very much, Jed. Appreciate that. I actually am. I'm trying to capture this now. You're probably right. I should have had it, so I got probably more. So I'm going to get yours. I've been trying to keep yours, Steve. I added yours. You'll see that in the notes, but I'm trying to capture the other. What would probably be a 4th sheet, right? So maybe I'll check in with Katie and Steve, make sure I got yours. I think I got Jed's all. All right, Nell, you're next. Oh, excuse me. For 3. Jed on 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, better. 1, 2, 3. There we go. Nell, you're up.
Okay, I would say that generally speaking, we agree that all 4 are potentially viable. For B, we answered it the opposite way. We felt that based on the student-centered data that Spence made the least sense to close. So if, the other way of saying that is the other three options are more viable than
Yep,
Spence.
yep.
However, it kind of relates to our answer under C. We were just talking about the optics of closing a new building in favor of keeping Spence, Northwoods in favor of keeping Spence, and then if the importance of, similar to some other groups, thinking a couple steps down the line about what that means for aging facilities. So our answer under C is kind of similar to that. If we, is there an option of somehow improving the overall age of facilities after these closures? So it's less of a current consolidation option and more of like step 2.
Okay.
I'm really being difficult.
No, you aren't. No, I think really it is. I mean, the theme I've heard in the last 3 things is what would be after the next wave? Like, if we had to make these cuts, what would be the next set? I think that's what you're saying. Like, so if you made those, like, how would there be a way to deal with maintenance or improvements around the existing sites, even if they're really old and they're still there, right? So it's really that next level. I think it's very consistent with that message.
Yeah.
If that's okay with that, I already have it. So unless you feel like there's something else there.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, the 3 tables in a row talking about. So now we're going to come back to table 2 or whatever it is. And it looks like, all right, you got the birthday girl last time. This time you get to be reporter.
We need a power clap for
Thank
now.
you so much, Jed. That's right. Yeah, Nell, 1, 2, 3. All right, thank you. Thank you, Jed. Taylor.
Suspense is killing you, isn't it? Because we said pass,
Yes.
No, nothing exciting over here. For A, we said yes, all 4.
Okay.
B, we said Spence and Northwoods, even though we had a very long conversation about Emerson, and we know it makes sense, but when you look at the map, it doesn't feel right for being a neighborhood school and then closing it and sending pretty much everyone north side when you're used to walking to school. So then for C, what the other option we mentioned was looking more at Summit and consolidating Summit. I heard a ooh. Wasn't my idea, but.
Thank you, Taylor. Anything else from that table? 1, 2, 3. That was a bad facilitation. 1, 2, 3. There we go. All right. So definitely consensus on some viable options here. Again, I'm going to check in with a couple with our next piece so I can make sure I get to the other notes for that second part. You'll see, again, more detail around this. There's a couple other items to consider here. Again, this is all helpful for us. We actually have our planning meeting after this tomorrow, and then we have another one a couple weeks later as we prepare. So we'll continue to get more information. You saw Michelle, too, like earlier today, she's asking questions about the arrangements within those options. So again, there's plenty to talk about here, as you can gather. This gets fairly detailed, because this is important, very important. All right, so I just want to give so you just saw this in the piece. Is anyone in the group, have you noticed something? I tried to say noticing, there were 3 tables that had this idea of, we're talking about our tasks, but there'll be a stage after that, because even he's not going away. Do we need to be mindful of that as we think about the next, 2 chess moves forward, maybe, as we think about what's the next best chess move? That's kind of what I heard. Did you have anything else that you heard, or maybe we didn't get a chance to talk about, but now I'm thinking about before we move on to our other segment? We have about 5 minutes if we need it. And if you do, Aaron's ready for the mic. Okay. Well, we'll just take that this time. Okay, Nell, let him do it.
Sorry. So it's related to the question I asked earlier, but I just wanted to say that I do think that the consideration of the distribution of economic status through schools is really important, and it's just so hard to hold all the factors, but it does seem like once a decision is come to, or a conclusion is come to, there's still a lot of variability within how boundary lines are actually drawn. So I guess I'm just bringing that forward again, that I think that that's really important as a consideration for that next stage of this specific
Of our
purpose.
task.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, the options, and then what's the arrangements with those options? The arrangements particularly being like, where are you drawing lines? How does that impact where kids would go relative to the whole system? Yeah, absolutely. And again, this, as you get narrower, like with some of this, now it helps us get into the details more of a few options rather than, umpteen options. So thank you. Jed?
Yeah, and again, yeah, I know that we all kind of talked about, we are thinking about those next steps, but one of the things that we thought about too was lifespan of buildings, kind of being able to assign a number, a placeholder there in what is the lifespan. Yes, we know the capital numbers for the next few years and kind of the mystery number ongoing, but again, are we talking 50 years out or more? And as we look at our data, it's going to hit zero. I mean, if we draw that line as a true line, it hits zero somewhere, and we don't believe that's actually going to happen. And so how far out are we looking to a level or a curve or a slowing or whatever?
And you're saying life expectancy of buildings is essentially?
Sorry, that was two different things. So
oh.
one item is
Yeah,
life
yeah.
expectancy of buildings. The other one is watching that declining
Yeah.
enrollment go.
Yeah.
We hit zero at 2093.
And I know that the one part in working with like the UW population lab and all that stuff is, they'll say our data gets better the closer you are to now, because a lot of it anticipates birth rates and what people might do around that, and the kids aren't even around. If you're within these 5 years, we can do pretty good. If it's like past that, it's a lot of conjecture. So that's the challenge a little bit. But
Right.
And who was next, Steve?
And we weren't trying to suggest that we could think that many steps out, but at least we had that discussion.
Yeah.
And it wasn't to promote that Emerson had to close and go to UWL or anything else. Is the variability of not being in a position where 5 years from now they make another decision to close something that you just put a bunch of capital into. The same criticism about why did we build Northwoods 20 years ago,
Yeah.
and now it's probably, the least maintenance needs, is thinking all those things through. So that anybody watching this, we're not suggesting one particular neighborhood school should close or not. It's what are the other viable reuses of those ought to be a variable to consider, because as we decline as a population demographically, if we're not attracting more students, how are we attracting more residential building for empty nesters, for people that need homes that are maybe tiny homes or apartments, homeless, those kinds of things, so that the city is a huge part of what are the redevelopment options. So how do we figure that, and then not put in a position that the school board 5 years from now is closing something that they just put a bunch of money into.
Thank you, Steve. And Courtney?
I will try to be more articulate than last time. I think when we consider the way that Northwoods was developed and the projections upon which it was developed, I just try to take to heart that I need to be extremely thoughtful about long-term impacts of decisions. Not to say that none of the decisions we're trying to make aren't necessary, but we have to remember that none of us have a crystal ball. We're going to try to do the best that we can and aim to not repeat those types of mistakes. But I think as we're making the decision, it occurs to me, while we've had lots of conversations about the data and the facts and what the makeup is like at the schools, safety, security, et cetera, we haven't necessarily had a conversation about who we are as a district, because part of the conversation is the budgetary issues. I think, as a community member, another part of the conversation is competition with our surrounding school districts. And it may not be the primary factor into why our budget is low, but it is a factor into growing our school district and growing our city. So it matters very much to me. So I think as we're making this decision, it would be helpful if at some point, and I don't know where it fits, if we as a group could participate in a conversation about who the La Crosse School District is. Are we who we want to be? If not, who do we want to be, and what does that mean to our community? What is the school district's role in the community? What type of schools are we? Are we trying to match our suburban partners? My daughter went to camp at Prairie View Elementary today, and it struck me that the landscaping out front is beautiful, and it's quiet, but that isn't La Crosse, and it shouldn't be La Crosse. So there's so many questions that we need to ask as we're trying to decide how to make this decision that also include who are we. And I would love for us to align on an objective and an identity as we make this decision.
As an outsider, it seems, it seems like one of your identities is choice. That's been a key. I mean, I'm just saying, a guy who lives across the state in different spots, Fox Valley. I've known about lacrosse and choice for quite a while, and you can see it in some of your things. So that's, I don't know if that's, to me, that's immediately clear as you think about that. And there are other things as well, but people having choice here has been valued a long time, and it stands out to me. But yes, appreciate the comment. Anything else? Okay, I'm going to make us have us move to the next piece then, which is, again, this is a little bit of forecasting too. 2 meetings from now, August 14th. You can see Bray up there in parentheses. Again, this is 2 meetings from now. We have a monthly one, of course, and we're going to have Bray's again one of the architectural partners that the district has worked for in the past, doing very nice work, and planning to be here to talk about particularly facility ways of making sure that that third task of this group, finding, again, opportunities to provide more equality in programming and experience. But to help with that, we need to find out what the current situation is. So again, we're gonna take about 10 minutes for Mr. Levina and Ms. Everson to talk about the current state at the secondary level. And then we're going to have a table talk after that with a couple questions to help you get input. And then we'll wrap up today's meeting, okay? So that's what we're going to try to do here. So we're going to try to switch to secondary now. How about a hand for Mr. Levina, Supervisor of Building and Grounds, and Stacey Everson, Director of Secondary Learning.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate all your comments tonight. And our focus here in the secondary level will primarily be at the high school level, and let me tell you why. We know currently that we're going from 3 middle schools to 2. And you saw in that earlier slide that we have about $118 million worth of needs in the school district. But because we passed a referendum, and thankfully we did, we were able to put some extra money in there. So if you look at the spending for next year's capital improvements, we're spending $3.7 million as opposed to $1.2 million. We're putting about a little over $1 million into both middle schools this summer and next year. So we're bringing those up to be more similar, but we'll address those as we move forward. So we're going to focus tonight on the high schools. And so it's well documented through our failed referendum in November that there are some deficiencies or some discrepancies between the 2 facilities. And so just to start thinking about that process, and I'm just going to introduce you to those facilities a little bit and really let Stacey talk to the challenges that we have between those 2. And so if we look at Central High School, built in 1967, you can see the site there, 17.9 acres, kind of in the middle of the city, 288,000 square feet. It's about 72,000 square feet larger than Logan High School. And so when you look at the differences there, that's equivalent of about a Northside Elementary School in terms of square footage. And then you look at student enrollment currently, this past year this is a third Friday count, a little over 1,000 students. If we look at Logan High School, built in 1979, so about 12 years newer than Central High School. More additions, quite frankly, than Central, which is a little surprising, but we've added some additions over the years. Site size, 29.3 acres, and you can see on there, much more athletic fields available there. 216,000 square feet, and this last year enrollment was at 734. And so those are the differences when we, terms of looking at the facility itself. I'd like Stacey to talk about the challenges that they provide as we move forward.
Okay, thank you. So I knew tonight's time would be limited. I attempted to explore some of the challenges that I might not have thought of for tonight's talk. Now, you know, the natural variation in enrollment between Central High School and Logan High School, of course, causes some natural pluses and minuses between the 2 schools. Some have to do with facilities and some do not. But overall, you know, the difference in enrollment does cause some differences in what we offer in courses and staffing variations at both high schools. which can lead to some inefficiencies too. For example, we may have to double up on some courses or double up on the need for equipment and resources, having two high schools with different needs. So when I think about the challenges and what Joe has listed here, there's really 4 categories that they fall into. One would be classrooms. And by and large, some of you may have ideas about how classrooms might be different from one high school to the other, but some things that we hear about commonly, Central High School, the age of the science classrooms, and that can be true at Logan High School as well. OSHA has some compliance regulations for us and some projects in our science classrooms. The age of our facilities do impact what we can do in our science classrooms. Logan High School's music classrooms are quite small for both band, choir, and orchestra. So it's something I hear about frequently at Logan High School, is the size of those music classrooms. Another area, another category is CTE, Career Technical and Educational Planning. Now, Dr. Rodering, our supervisor of CTE, talks a lot about the pathways she's busy building for our students, ways for our students to propel themselves into an academic pathway in high school, be able to earn college credit at the same time, industry credentials. It's a way for the Coulee region to retain our own youth as they explore career pathways in high school. And our facilities can limit some of those pathways. And I'm not sure how much detail you'd like me to get into, but for example, in our career technical educational programs, auto, tech ed, our auto labs are small and inefficient. Sir Joe hears about that a lot. We could be building upon our auto technician or auto mechanic pathway if our facilities were updated, and that would be true in both high schools. We are busy building additional pathways in agri-science and aviation, and our facilities are void of some of the classroom space and the laboratory space that we would need, including exterior doors and bays that would allow us to work on large group projects. And as some of you have mentioned tonight, when we look around us and want to be that destination high school setting, some of our neighbors have facilities that enable them to build those pathways. So it's something that we're eager to correct in the future. This could be true with our family consumer classrooms as well. Although our labs in our family consumer classrooms are adequate, they're not modern, and they miss some of the highlights we'd like to see if we were to build upon a child care program in our district. Those are just 2 specific areas in CTE that I could mention tonight. Of course, there's storage needs with our ACE Construction Academy that's very popular as well. So there are a number of facility improvements that we could discuss at further meetings in that CTE area. But most of all, it's what we miss for our students when it comes to earning dual credit and industry credentials that I think we're most eager to correct. Another category, of course, is co-curriculars. Some things that we hear about in that area, I think both high schools have some things that could be improved upon. For example, at Central High School, I know our students are traveling for soccer, baseball, and softball to find adequate field space, and of course, Central High School does not have a pool. Logan High School has a pool, but that pool has a shelf life. I bet Principal Geneva Coe could tell us about that tonight. We're not able to compete using that pool, and of course it's going to have some maintenance needs here in the near future to even keep it open. Is that correct, Mr. Geneva Coe? Yeah.
We would need a whole new pool vessel inside that to have competition.
Okay. Other things, Logan High School, tennis courts need resurfacing, and of course their softball and baseball diamonds need improvements as well. One other category, I guess we call other, but parking. I know you can't go too far in La Crosse where we're not all talking about parking, but Central High School students feel it. They have, I think, 99 spots for students, totally inadequate. So a lot of those students are coming into the office complaining about parking tickets, and the neighbors are complaining too. So parking is in that other category. Again, this is not meant to be an exhaustive list. I could go into more detail, but that sort of gives you a broad look at those 4 categories.
And so what we did is just kind of a snapshot so you could have a comparison as it looks at facilities. We have the ages, you can see that, you can see the square footage. Talks about the additions that we had there, talks about the pool and the vessel that we would have to replace at Logan, and we don't have a pool at Central High School. Theater seats is a big one. If you look at our theater, really, we can't do performances that aren't designed for performance at either site, but Central is more equipped. If you look at a planetarium, we have one at Central, and we just upgraded that through the capital improvement process a couple years ago, but we do not have that there. And then when you look in terms of athletics that Stacey mentioned, the biggest one that sticks out there is on-site that we're able to do, and the turf football field that we have there. And then when you talk in terms of tech ed and automotive, I will tell you we really don't have a great program, and it's not because of our teachers, it's because we don't have, we have one bay with no lift at Logan, and we have no bay at Central. So inadequate facilities as we compare those. So that's just a start. And so you heard Stacey mention that. So something to start thinking about when we talk in terms of discrepancies between the facilities and course offerings that we can offer. And so with that, I'll open it up to any questions.
My question is not to imply that I have an opinion on this. I'm just very curious. When you say that some of our surrounding school districts have better facilities for the automotive program, is it preferable to have those on site at our schools, or are there opportunities for partnerships within the lacrosse community that would allow us to still have that competitive nature and maybe even a leg up by having relationships? Is that an opportunity for us?
Okay, we'll just share it. Okay.
I may have missed part of that question, but I think I captured enough to tell you we do partner with UWL, Western Technical College, and Viterbo, and often do share space, equipment, and resources. One of the drawbacks, not every student, for example, in our academies, whether it's HSA, ACE, or our engineering academy, it works when it works. And what we also try to is to offer those same courses, or at least a partial course pathway in our schools, so that for students that can't accomplish all 3 class periods in an academy, still have an opportunity to experience some of those courses to build upon a pathway of their choice. So if I'm making any sense there, when we can share, we do, but there are certain pieces of equipment, classroom spaces that would be absolutely necessary to offer equitable opportunities for students in some of those areas.
And if I could add, I think the biggest need is at that introductory level, and so that we have students who don't know, can't be introduced to those activities. The students who know their pathway, yes, we have those partnerships, but it's those students at the 9th grade level or the 10th grade level who may be exploring. We don't have those facilities to introduce them. And so they can't travel down to TC or UWL or wherever it might be.
Yes, well said.
On our high school end, I know we had our past referendum with that, and we talk about the 2 high schools and the value behind that. I think also that referendum was quite large in cost, location. There's many other factors in it. So do we have any indication of truly what our community values? Was it, maybe it wasn't the fact of one high school, maybe it was location, maybe it was the money, but do we know which one maybe was the priority, or what made that not attractive option?
I have some thoughts. I might not be the expert on this, but certainly our community has spoken, and spoken in a variety of ways. So Dr. Engel, correct me if I get some of this wrong. Certainly there's some legacy practices and some, there's a strong feeling of belongingness at Central High School and at Logan High School and at Polytech at the high school level, correct? I do think that location of where one high school would be certainly mattered to our voters. But it also, I think we also heard about that sense of belongingness and culture that exists at both ends of our community. So, Dr. Engel, what would you add to that?
I would agree. I mean, it was across the spectrum depending on where you live and what you prioritize. It was certainly pieces of location, for some. I think it was probably more strongly around identity. and that pride in your school and where you're from and where your kids are going to go, that sense of belonging. You know, this is where I want my kids to have these teachers and this experience. And I think it kind of gets to what Courtney was saying about, you know, like, who are we? What do we want to be? And we can accomplish that with one school or two. Like, it's just a matter of how we want to invest in that. That's both options are perfectly viable for our community. It just looks a little bit different, maybe costs a little bit different, you know. But I think our community is supportive of improving our high school's experience. I think they didn't like that idea, and so we have to seek out different ones. And maybe sometime in the future that idea comes back around with a different group of people someday.
I'd take one quick question we haven't left, and that'll be it, and we'll get you talking.
And this isn't a gotcha question by anything, but if you could check your data again from what you gave us on slide 37 the first night of total high school capacity versus what you have here. Yeah. Central High School, originally we were told, had a 1,300 capacity. Your slide says 1,560. And there's a reason I'm asking this. And Logan was originally said at 1,600 versus now it says 1,072. The enrollment is about the same. The reason I'm raising that is it gets to the question of capacity. And based on some of the demographics, if enrollment keeps going down, my original numbers said in 10 years we're going to be at 50% capacity in both or less. And unused capacity is one of your greatest challenges. So if you could clarify that for us. The numbers in tonight's slides are different, even though the enrollments are almost identical. So that may end up getting to some of what space you might have to address some of the issues that you talked about curriculum-wise. So I don't know why the differences are there, and I'm not trying to play gotcha.
No, we noticed that, and so thank you for noticing that. I noticed that when I came up tonight and said something to Dr. Engel. So this is, yes. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. But these would be closer to the capacities. There is a little bit of room. For instance, I can remember in the 90s when I didn't work for the district, and we had over 900 or about 900 students at Logan Middle. And so, yeah, we can accommodate them. Wouldn't be ideal, but yes.
I'm going to keep us moving. Thanks. About a hand for these two as well, please. Appreciate it very much. Again, what we're just trying to do is give you a taste, about 12-minute taste there, or 15 minutes maybe. So these are the two questions that are going to help us plan better for when we get deeper into this issue in August, is our intent. So at the table, now again, if you were the reporter, congrats, you're done for the night. You don't have to report at this time. We don't have time for, so yes, some of you are going, all right. So, but we do need a timekeeper. We're going to have 10 minutes. And then for the recorder, will you please, there should be another sheet of paper. This will just be capturing handwritten notes at the end of the night. I'll see you in 10 minutes to wrap it up. These are the two questions. Hope it makes sense just looking up at the screen. Thank you. Okay. Let's try to come together so I can get you on your way by 8:30 as promised. Okay, so recorders, thank you again for leaving both recorded sheets today on the table. We'll collect those. I just did want to say that I was capturing notes from, we had the A, B, and C before. We had these questions, right? So I was capturing them as we went. And then there were some other things that were said. So I tried to capture them here. I think I got most of it here. Steve, I think I might have missed one of yours, so maybe, but please take a look at it, and anyone else, Jed, whoever, I try to do my best. But again, we want to make sure you got anything else that was key in here. If there's a key question, QR forms are there for you as well. Again, we'll do our best to try to, so this is stuff I would think we will try to consider as we plan for bringing the next wave next month. As part of what you're thinking about. So again, make sure that's accurate so we can help plan for a really great meeting next time. So again, I'm just going to punch forward here. So what we have is next time we'll meet is July 19th. Thanks again in advance for hopefully being here then, about a month from now. We're going to continue to get deeper in the survey results and some of the other factors you talked about here to look at the options that would seem make sense. I would see us coming back with these four, looking at the feedback you gave us to help, again, we're going from explore last time to evaluate to going a little and refining. You can see us what we're trying to do. As we get clearer about options, we can then get clearer about, okay, what should the boundary choices and assumptions make the most sense to get at the things you're thinking, or try to balance all that out. So again, but the narrowing helps us get deeper in the details. So again, thank you for that. This is important too. So again, just before you leave, if you have something else, let us have it. That's helpful. As always, your committee feedback is really helpful to us. We look at it. We'll look at it right away tomorrow in our planning meeting. And again, thank you so much. Really helpful, productive day tonight. Thank you. Finish up with the feedback and have a great June. We'll see you after the 4th.